now, I've started with what the definition of news is. Like, news is something that can interest to a great number of people. Uh, so, as we all know, if a dog bites a man, it's not news. It's the other way. If a man bites a dog, that becomes the news. And you have many people, obviously, over a period of time defining what news is. So, few of the famous definitions have been given in your text, whatever. I think you have your books with you, right? Um so, news is something, obviously, that is interesting, that relates to the great majority of the people. Now, when we're talking about uh, the definition, like the news has to make an impact. So only then can it be relevant to the people. So when we're talking about news being relevant to the people, uh, uh, so it should be done in a way that, okay, there is always a conflict between whom is the news being aimed at. Is it to the majority of the people um, who uh, are affected by that particular news, or are we talking about the people who are the creators of the news, like the minority who create the news, and then that news is being put across to the majority of the people who are not making the news? Have you understood that? Hemant,
Yes, ma'am.
is this clear? You have any doubts, you can stop me, and uh, we can have a discussion or whatever.
Sure, ma'am. When I have any, I'll definitely.
Okay, fine. So I'll just go with my flow, then we'll do it. So
Yes, ma'am.
now, um, so when something that is now coming to the concept of news, what can come under the concept of news when there is something that is new? News is not that is stale. News is something that is, uh, as we all know, it is more present. That is happening now. What what has happened yesterday is no more news. So what will happen in the future can become news, but what has happened, because news has got an expiry date. It is not something that has got eternity. Okay, you get back to records, that's a different thing. But generally, we get back to archives or records only in context to what is happening now or what is happening in the present. Not it is because that has happened at that time. We are just then that becomes history. It doesn't become news. So news is something that happens. So that has got currency. That means that has got the present aspect attached to it. Okay, so news is something that is new. Then we can also say that news is something, as I've said, that is perishable. It perishes. So that's the difference between, though the same information is printed in the newspapers and the magazines at a later point of time, the magazine comes out mostly weekly or fortnightly or monthly or so, but same news may be discussed, but that is not what um, that 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 takes a different form. So news in the newspapers is something that is current, that has got a present tense, and that becomes perishable. It becomes stale. So if there is some, for example, there has been some uh, okay, as of now, to what's happening in the Twin Cities is like you have Ganesh Nimmersion that is going on a very huge scale. So if we are talking about that, after today it will happen. So after tomorrow, once the process ends, then it no one talks about it. So that is perishable. News becomes perishable. Though environment people may talk about, they may talk about it at a later time, but uh, but as of now, we are talking about the processions, the way the people are into it. All that becomes relevant only for the day, and the next day it doesn't makes it doesn't make so much of a context. So as I've said, when you're talking about the concept of news, news should be of interest to a greater number of people. And as I've said, so for whom is it targeted? Definitely the majority of the people. Government brings about schemes. So whom is it aiming at? It is aiming at the people. There are schemes meant for the minorities, schemes meant for women, schemes meant for kids, schemes meant for differently abled people, differently challenged people. So these are all news. There are schemes for women empowerment. So what is it targeting? It is targeting a big number of people. So if something is there that is aiming at a big number of people, then that becomes news. IPL matches. People watch these matches like mad. So it is aiming at a big group. So that's the reason sometimes front pages, though it is aimed at mostly socio-political news, even carry sports news because it is something that makes people mad and crazy, and a big majority of the people may love that news. So, what is news? News should be something that is new, that is perishable, and that is aimed and that should be of interest. Basically, if I say it is not something that can be it can causing some kind of a movement, but it's something that it's not something that can motivate people, but something that can interest people. So that's how the news is. It's something that is unusual, that can be, yeah, it doesn't have to be routine. So people, when you're talking about news, it has to be mostly unusual. There might be usual news, routine news also that is getting into the newspaper. But when we read that, then we can always say, okay, it is something that is happening on a day, every time. Accident, yeah, it happens every time. If there is an accident, okay, it doesn't matter. So, but until if there is some celebrity, a politician, or a sports person, or a movie person who is part of it, of the accident, then that is unusual, and therefore it becomes news. So this way, understanding of news is what makes it different. So anything that we would like to have some inputs here, Ahmed or Alikya, if yeah, I think yeah, anything that can be added over here. You are fine? Yeah, fine. So now coming to elements of news and news values. So the news values, the main thing that we need to look, because if, as we all know, the news is meant for this society, for the people. It is like a means through which um, people are awakened or something like that, or given information. So, so that news should have values. It can't be biased. It can't be yellow journalism. It can't be something that can instigate it in a negative way. Instigating generally goes with negative meaning. So when we're talking about news, it has to be something that can be motivating, not instigating. So every news has to be having all these uh, uh, values or elements in the news. One is, first, to start with, timeliness. Obviously, it has to be new. If it can't be old, it has to be timely and new. And then it has to be mostly proximity. See, we might be interested with what is happening in the Trump-Kamala Harris debates, because soon US elections are going to be there. So there might be some element of interest. But what interests more is our proximity to the news. What is happening in India? What is our chief minister here in the state is doing, or local MLA is doing. So we are more concerned with what is happening closest to us. We might be interested in the other news as well, geographical, across geographical diversity, but we also would be more interested in news that is close to us. Then news that has conflict is also is reported, but when reporting the conflict, it has to be something that is not taking the people in the wrong direction, but not to have a general understanding. So, for example, obviously now Hydra is something that is there, where the government is on taking down the structures that are built illegally. The municipality is trying to pull down structures. So there is a conflict there. So conflict need not be always in terms of war or otherwise conflicts, but conflict can also be whenever there is a difference, or where some parties are hurt. So that is a conflict. But the municipality has its own version saying that it is doing it because constructions are illegal. And so the people are voicing there. So there is a conflict. So even then, it has to be presented in the right way. Then the news should have consequence. It should be having an impact. It should be development oriented. It cannot be always revolving around just movies or fun, or just covering unwanted things. It has to be something. For example, even sports can be a very encouraging thing. You have good stories, success stories, where people from very low backgrounds, low in the, not in terms of just not being economically, but otherwise also, who have less exposure to resources, even then who are making great in the news, in the sports, in their own categories. So that could be in terms of the development. So it could be of human interest. It covers some kind of controversy too. And then, obviously it has to be out of the ordinary. So these are the elements, general, that has, because why not the other elements? Because as we all see, it is something that has been studied over a period of time, and universally across different platforms, though even other things may be part of the news, not saying that, but generally, for a broader understanding, these are the elements that needs to be integrated in the news to have a relevance. So of all these things, what is the most important thing is human interest. What do you mean human interest? Because it is meant for people. We're talking about people. So if whatever, a combination of this, you may be having timeliness, you may be having a conflict, you may be having an impact, you may having a development story. If all these things doesn't involve the element of human interest, then that news will not have value. So that's what we are talking about, news value. So of anything that can be associated with this human interest element, that is what makes the news uh, uh, news acceptable, or news that has got value. So this concept, anything that can be talked about? Is there anything that we can discuss? Because you two are there, so you become my captive audience, and I always then get back to yeah. So anything that can be talked, if if there is if it is clear, then I think then we can always talk about some human interest story that has actually touched you after reading the news. See, we hear news, right? We always read, we hear the news on the radio or listen to in the see and watch on the television or whatever. So podcasts, even podcasts are now bringing us with news. So anything that you can think of, any human interest story. Yeah. So now the Olympics are going about. So these the Paralympics, you have so many in fact, I think uh, kudos to them. The number of medals that they have achieved in the Paralympics is, I think, is more appreciated. I think to be more appreciated than the number of medals,
Motivating.
yeah, that we get it in the general category of Olympics. And I think the number is also equally more or less the same. The way the people are doing that is what is human interest, because people are putting in like overcoming their constraints. They would have so many constraints, but still they overcame those constraints and really working hard to prove themselves. So that is what is motivating, in spite of their challenges. So this is what we can say that is of human interest. So and maybe uh, it covers all these elements. Don't you think so? It is consequential, it is developmental, it is out of ordinary, though not conflict based. It is very prominent. So that's how it has to be. News has to be something that gets us to think. That's what the news has to be. So whenever you read a newspaper, so we should uh, be at least enthusiastic about reading the news, not the way the current newspapers, some are which are very tilted and which uh, which which do not adhere to the news values. So next, coming to the type of news category. Now, news can be basically categorized into hard news and soft news. Now, the hard news is something that is centered on 5Ws. If you're not familiar with what the 5Ws are, they are what, where, when, who, and why. And it also talks about 1H, and that is how. So anything that gives you direct answers to this is what is hard news. Most of the newspapers generally go with hard news. When if you read a news report, reporting is hard news. Op-ed pages. What are op-ed pages? Opinion and editorial pages. So the op-ed pages are soft news, where there is a lot of factual information, there is analysis, there is research done. So you look into the news and study the news, and then go about with a deeper understanding into answering beyond 5Ws and 1H. That becomes soft news. So there is hard news is more or less. So if you're talking about the difference between hard and soft news, to a great extent, hard news is just giving the information. So there is no element of biasness until unless you try to bring in it. But generally, because it is answering the 5Ws and 1H, it is just answering who is done, who has done it, basic preliminary, like how the first information report, FIR, right? Wherein you just answer, just go about answering who has done it, how was it done, when was it done, where was it done. So it is best just basically answering the 5Ws and 1H. So that's the reason why there is not much of scope for interpretation. But unlike that, the soft news, okay, it is more analysis. It is like deep, like if you take the earth, like it is, while the hard news is like the soil, the ground. The soft news is the deeper crust, the magna, like globe, which is inside. What is happening? There is fire in it. There is a lot of things that are happening inside the earth too. It's like so that's like, or you can say like it's like a volcano, like hard news, and then you have the lava that comes up. So it is like the soft news is like more, and you have different categories of soft news. While hard news is one category, it could be both the hard and soft news can be. You have different categories of news, like you have social news, you have political news, you have sports news. These are basically news categories. But if you're talking about soft news, because we're talking about research, analysis, understanding, uh, uh, then there are various categories to it. You have something like features, feature articles. You call them articles as well. So you have features, we have editorials, we have profiles of interest, we have human interest, we have political and social news, the social news, the business, economic, and finance news, and this obviously we can go on this the sports, the crime news. So there are various. We can have even cultural news, like that is there. Cultural news is also part of news, right? So these are all various categories of news that we are talking about. And now let us start with the features. What are features? Feature story is not hard news, as I've said, because there is, if you're talking about a feature, it is studied, that the news is studied, and then a perspective is given to that news. Okay. Uh, it seeks the features focuses on a place or a person. Um, uh, what is important for any kind of soft news is balance. It is not that just because you don't have to uh, be taking a perspective, it is not that you cannot have a stand. Like there has to be balance. You need to give both the uh, dimensions, or it's just not two dimensions. You can give 3D, 4D, 5D, or whatever. Whatever dimensions can be there, the dimensions can be given to that news. So, apart from the dimensions, there has to be overall balance, because when we read different dimensions, obviously, we also have some conclusions that are there. So when that those conclusions make an impact on the reader. So when those conclusions are being made, the conclusions has to be more balanced. So that is the basic aspect for any kind of soft news. Now coming to the editorials. Now what are editorials? Editorials are objectively, obviously the mouthpieces of the newspaper. It represents what the newspaper stands for. It expresses an opinion. Okay. All editorials definitely are personal. If, for example, you take the Times of India. So is there now the very editorials, if you read the editorials, at the end of the editorial, um, do you see a, a, um, a slant, or do you see what kind of perspective is what that you can always deduct? Or if you, for example, you watch Republic TV, right? If you listen to Republic TV, you know what is, how it is, how the news is presented. On the other hand, you watch Mirror now. So you know what is happening with the Mirror now. So it is not like as though people are unaware, people are what should I say, people are blind. It's like people do read what is happening, as some somewhere I have seen, like people who have more lungs, like who can shout more, it doesn't mean that they have an impact. They definitely, people uh, even without lungs can also make an impact. So it is therefore it is important that we need to look into what and how the news is being presented. So whenever we talk about editorials, right? The purpose of the editorial is just not also, as I've said, like in features, because even editorials are based on research, editorials are based on uh, looking into things. So it is important that even the editorials needs to look into how the news is being put across. So it is definitely very important to understand how the news is being presented. Then comes the profiling of the newsmakers. So again, when you make a profile of a newsmaker, right? The profiling of the newsmaker can be, who are newsmakers? Obviously, ordinary people cannot be the newsmakers. Newsmakers are those people who are uh, who makes a difference in the society. Those are the newsmakers. So when we have newsmakers, who comes under newsmakers? Mostly, we are talking about people who are the so-called celebrities are the newsmakers.
For
So,
now,
uh,
for now it is politicians.
so when profiling is done, obviously some kind of research is done into it, and most often, generally, we find that the newspapers' profiles are mostly positive. Then coming to human interest. So when news is done, human interest, so individuals, uh, uh, their how should we go about, as I've explained, because I want to bring a news perspective to put for what human interest can be. Human interest could be something that can make even odd, because that is what concerns the ordinary people. So it has to have, any kind of news should have that human interest. So you have the political and the social news. So what is political news? As I've said, political news is something that mostly concerns with the politics, political parties, politicians, and uh, and the acts and the functions or whatever the politicians are doing. So that is mostly part of the political news. Now coming to uh, um uh, to good how political reporting is done. It has to be obviously neutral. See, there we have leaders. So sometimes what happens is, instead of focusing on what the leader is talking or what the leader is trying to present, many times a leader is made into a cartoon figure, just to make oneself, the other leader, great or superior. Some leaders are made as cartoon figures or are put down, not given. So some news channels have this process of uh, of not focusing on what can, because obviously by putting a proper a face to the political figure, maybe the chances of the other political leaders may come down. So there are different ways of putting across the political reporting. Now, coming to social news, mostly, as we all know, social news is mostly concerned about issues that concern society. It could be about illiteracy, unemployment, women empowerment, child abuse, child labor, violence against, you name any category, like all the issues associated with the society. It could be regionalism, like how, so when you're talking about how Andhra and Telangana, like there has been a feeling over a period of time that Telangana's interests are not taken care of or neglected. So that becomes a big social news as well, in a cultural way as well. And then now coming to business, economic, and financial news. So all are different categories. Business news is different. Though there is an overlap, definitely there is an overlap. Nothing can be compartmentalized. But business is concerned about companies, their establishment, MNCs. That comes under the business news. So since business is mostly connected to finance, so we are talking about financial news. But when you're talking about financial news, it also talks about business, about bank interest rates, or what are the regulations or regulatory mode. So there are different ways of how the finance news can be put across. So we have some very good magazines, newspapers that focuses on business news and finance, which a combination of all these kinds of news. So any ideas to what are the various business, economic, and financial newspapers are?
Economic Times.
Okay, we have Mint. If you have time, just read Mint. Mint is so very different from the rest of the business newspapers. We do have Economic Times, Business Line. It is from the Hindu newspaper. So Money Control is one more online website channel that talks about business, the finances, and shares, trade marketing, and all these things. So these are different categories of news. Till 1990, since India was mostly socialistic country, there was development in its own phase or in its own ways, but post LPG, that is liberalization, privatization, and globalization, there has been a huge jump in the way the economy progressed, and therefore we find that there is what should we say? The economic reforms provided a boost to the way the society is. So this led to a wider coverage. Earlier, the business news or economic news or the finance news was just part of a single sheet, single spread. But now, post 90s, there have been many newspapers that have emerged. Specialized newspapers is what we can call, wherein you have different newspapers or magazines meant for different subjects and different topics. Obviously, if someone interested in cars will have something on car magazine, or someone interested in bikes, there are special. For trekking, there are special magazines. For kayaking, there are special magazines. So you name a topic, so there are that means they are niche and specialized magazines, and there are people who are interested in reading them. So you have many specialized magazines that are coming about. So off late, so all these specialized magazines, you take a category, all these are growing, to the thanks to the process of LPG, and wherein and obviously the satellite communication enabled exposure has led to adventure sports and all these aspects. Now coming to sports news. Sports is something that is growing in importance in the field. Obviously, unfortunately, though our sports is limited to very few category of sports. Of late, with the coming of the World that has boosted cricket to a very great extent, and with the coming of IPL 2 as well, there has been a growth, a tremendous growth, which is unbelievably high and huge. Even tennis has, thanks to Sania Mirza, to some extent, tennis also has gained momentum. And thanks to people like Saina Nehwal, Sindhu, there has been Kashyap, there has been growth in the shuttle badminton category as well. And though Indian team has done extraordinarily well in the hockey in the Olympics, they won the bronze. Still, hockey, though it is a national sport, continues to lag behind in terms of appreciation or acceptance. But it is good to see that in the sports sections of newspaper, it covers features, columns, and profiles of sports person. And as I've said, there are special magazines which are Sports Star is one such magazine, which and there are quite a number of magazines that have come into place. So these magazines gives a profile of the sports people, their lifestyles, their success stories. Because if you look into most of the players of cricket, be it Pant or Mohammad Siraj from Hyderabad, whose father has been an auto driver, but from that place now he has made an incredible mark in the Indian cricket team. So people like them, they worked hard. So obviously, so that brought them the success. So the language in this news is coverage of sports news is very racy and lively, and the pictures also, they are in the most of the newspaper magazines or newspapers are very what should I say, very beautiful, glossy, and attractive. So it is important to understand that the sports news have picked up a lot. Now coming to crime is also now important aspect of news coverages. Why we can talk about crime? Because if you look into most of the OTT platforms, you open Netflix, you have so many series on crime, drugs, mafia, and all that. You talk about even on Amazon or even other Sony Live or ZEE5. There are so many stories based on crime, seasons and seasons on crime. And so there has been somehow a shift in the way people are looking into these crime stories. Maybe the acceptance for crime has increased. So there has been a lot of crime stories that have come up. Apart from the crime, I have also talked about cultural news. The cultural news could be news that talks about the local cultures or regional cultures. For example, um, in Telugu speaking states, there are folklores about or in a song form that are done, put across, and you have something like um, shows or folk dances, and then you have different ways through which folk songs are performed. So these are all otherwise lost arts that are there and are pretty much covered in the cultural news. Here, obviously, I'm also overlapping, and there is not much of negativity, because there is not so much of negative, but there could be some kind of a variation in terms of the importance that is given to the coverage of because unlike in other private channels, at least government owned or not owned, government-based news channels like Doordarshan, it gives a platform across various groups, across various communities, and it could be religious communities or social communities or whatever it is. The government, the Doordarshan channel provides time slots. For example, for northeastern communities, or because we hardly know how the cultural aspects are of northeastern community. So there is a coverage for all of these things. So right from Kashmir to Gujarat to northeastern states to South Kerala. So Ahmad, by any chance you're from Kerala?
No, ma'am, I'm not.
Ahmad?
Yes, ma'am. Can you hear me?
So there are different categories of news.
Hello, ma'am. Can you hear me?
Yeah. I can hear you.
No, ma'am. I'm not from Kerala.
You're not from Kerala. Which place are you from?
I am from Hyderabad, ma'am. 4 generations. I think this is my 12th generation in Hyderabad, the 14th generation in Hyderabad. I don't remember.
Oh, you're from Hyderabad. So it's all from Pardada and all that. Okay.
Oh, yes. Well, seventh, eighth, ninth, I don't know from which
Okay.
part I.
Okay. Earlier to that?
Oh, well, we actually came from, I mean, Saudi Arabia, and then, then Afghanistan and all that. That was again centuries ago, say about in 12th
At least
century,
you have
we
a
came.
track of your you at least have a know of history. So where you are
Yes, ma'am.
very clear.
That is, we are in here book history books of Hyderabad as well.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, as you can actually Google it, well, Yar Khans from Hyderabad. So we have a long history.
What did you say? Yar
Uh,
Khans.
Yar Khans from Hyderabad, yeah.
Oh, okay. Then I think I'll have a look into.
And I believe you have an idea about the one who was actually called Sherlock Holmes of Hyderabad.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah, I heard. Now,
Faz,
as you say, I think I can recollect. Yes,
oh,
correct.
Fazle Rasul Khan.
Ha,
So
ha,
he
ha.
he was also one of my grandfather's brother.
Oh, okay. Amazing. So good. So I'm talking to a student who has got great affiliations to history, and all of us have our own history that is there. Everyone has
Yes,
got a
yes,
past
yes.
and a history, but good.
Yeah. God's grace, God's grace.
Yeah, that's nice. Um, good. So that's the reason why you want to get into the footsteps of your grandfather. I think the time is
Yes,
going to be up. So I'll just,
journalism. Yes, to get into that. Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah. now coming to the qualities of good news reporting. So attribution is important because you cannot state a thing without giving an attribute. If
Yeah.
you have to give your source. The source has to be identified. Until unless the source has some kind of a life threat or something like that. But attribution is very important. Attributing gives authenticity to the news writing. So that is also important. Sourcing is very important. Then also you have to keep always the words short, crisp, and small. It is easy to understand short sentences than lengthy ones. Then actually a good journalist should have a news for news. So the Sherlock Holmes or whatever we are talking about, like if you don't have the inclination for news gathering, then there is no way you can be a detective or a journalist. Like whatever it is, you need to deep inside. Otherwise, you need to have the orientation towards having news. So these are the qualities of a news good reporter. So anything that we need to talk about or discuss, if you want to go through the text, go through the text once, and then we can always um, talk in the next session or next class.
Uh, so we have to study the same way how we have studied in the prior uh, what is it say?
Whatever it
Semester.
is, see,
Semester, how we have to actually do that the lesson wise or the chapter wise or the unit wise.
obviously, no, like whatever it is, we're going according to the unit, right?
Yes.
So let us go with the unit wise. Since I have talked about this unit,
No,
pa-
what I'm talking about is from exams perspective point of view. How will
hmm,
it be good? I mean, going through your unit wise will be good, or collecting some questions which are repeated that will be good.
see,
Which one will be good?
always extra reading always helps. It's just not for the exam that you would be doing. If you are actually interested in the subject, then always go with the extra reading. There are always references that are done given at the end of the unit, right? So if someone is really serious or interested about the subject, then I think then references can always be, further readings can always be helpful. But if you want to go with the exam point of view, just read with whatever is there in the unit, that would help.
Sure, ma'am.
Okay. So that's what. If you have understood, it's well and good. Otherwise, if there is anything that needs to be talked, we can always discuss in the next class.
Sure, ma'am.
Okay. So thank you. Thank you, uh, Ahmad and Alekia. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks to you too. Bye bye.